Hey everyone, this is Kevin from thechesswebsite.com. Today we're going to be going over a fun trap in the Vienna game, which starts out with e4, e5, knight c3, and then after they mirror us with knight c6, we're going to play bishop c4, attacking the weak f7 square early on. Now, most common is just to play knight to f6, but they could mirror us as well and play bishop to c5, attacking our weak square on f2. Makes a lot of sense. And if they do this, we're going to play queen g4. Now, a lot of players won't play g6 in this spot because if they do play g6, they like to fianchetto their bishop here to g7. And since their bishop's already out here, they may not decide to do that. They could also try something pretty crazy, knight to d4, try to be pretty aggressive, but then we can just come up here, take on g7, attack their rook here. They could put us in check, but then we move over. If they try to, gobble up our rook here, they are going to lose. So they're going to have to try something else, maybe potentially queen f6 in this spot. But then we could just take that, they take ours, and then we take their material right here, and we are up in material after the rook to g8, pawn to g3. You can see we are already up in material. If we come back, though, we are going to be looking at the variation where instead of playing g6 or to d4, they're going to play queen f6. You can see their queen and their bishop are both eyeing down our pawn on f2, which is a huge weakness for us because the king is the only piece that's defending it, and we're not even going to consider that right now. Instead, we're going to play the move knight to d5, and this is the gambit we're going to look at. It has a 69% win rate, so if you can actually play this against your opponent, you are going to have a fun time. Now, if you look at it and say, can't they just play queen to f2? Absolutely, they can, but the problem is it's very difficult for black to capitalize on this, and white's going to have a very good game. So first, let's look at what white's going to do. Well, they only have one option. That's to play king to d1. And now where does black continue to? Because we have so many threats. We have the threat of knight to c7, check, forking the rook on a8. We have the threat of queen to g7, preparing to take this rook on h8. And yes, this bishop and the queen did attack on f2, but after that, they can't really do anything else. The queen can't come to f1. It's being protected by the light square bishop. It can't come to e1 because black doesn't have control of the e1 square except the queen. Can't take this knight here. Can't take the pawn on g2 right away because the queen is protected. So how do they continue? Well, let's look at a few options. One, let's say they start with g6. But if they move g6, we can now introduce an additional threat. We can play knight h3, attacking their queen. And where do they go from here? Well, if they tried something like d6 and say, hey, you can take my queen, but then I can just take your queen. The problem why that's not going to work for black is we can now take with our knight, and then when they take our queen with their bishop, we can now take with our knight. Now you can castle on the queen side, but you can see come over, we have 4 minor pieces, they have 3 minor pieces. They did lose that exchange. But there's just no good square for them to go to. So let's come back. What if they don't play g6? What if instead they play king to d8? Remember, they have to worry about so many threats. One of those threats is knight to c7, forking the king and attacking the rook on a8. But now we can just play queen takes on g7. They could come down to d4. This is definitely an option. But now we can go ahead and take on h8. Because our queen is no longer protecting the g2 square, they can swing over and take on g2. But now we can play the move knight to e3, which is such a brilliant move as you really study the situation. And they can't take our rook, because if they take our rook on h1, we can now take on g8. And this is going to be checkmate. There's no way for them to stop the mating threat that we have. It does take a few moves for us to get there, but eventually it is going to be checkmate. So if we come back, we recognize that that's not going to work. They can't take with their queen on h1. So how do they really respond after we play knight to e3? Because remember, their queen is under attack. So the other option is to play queen g6. They need to protect that knight on g8. But now we just play c3, attacking that knight, kicking that away. They move the knight away. We can just take it with our bishop. They take it with their pawn. Then we play knight to e2. And you can see we have a fine game and we're up in material. We've taken one of their rooks. We both have 3 minor pieces. This is going to be a pretty easy win for white. Now, if we come back, what if they don't play king to d8 early on? What if instead they play bishop to f8? They try to protect that pawn on g7. Well, as you can imagine, we have too many threats, so we play knight c7 check. And then after they play king d8, we just take their rook on a8, and they're in a losing position. White should have a pretty easy game from here. Now, the best move for black in this position, after we play king to d1, is to play the move king f8. Now, similar to once they played g6, we're going to be playing knight to h3. And you can see that the queen is under attack, so how do they defend it? It can't really come along this f-file. There's no safe squares for it. It can't come to g3 or h4. Both of those are under attack. So there's a few options. One, we already looked at why it's not going to work if they play d6, because then we just take their queen. They take our queen, and then we take with our knights, and they lose a minor piece. Okay, well, what happens if they play queen d4? Well, now we can just play d3, protecting both our bishop and our pawn right here. And then the next move, we have the move c3. Again, black's in a tough spot. They don't really have anywhere to go. So they could play the best move, but it's still tough for them, and that is h5. So yes, it's not going to work if they play d6 and attack our queen with their bishop, but h5 does make some sense here, because if we take their queen now, they can just take with their pawn. But we can play g5. Now, if they play f6, we play queen g6. They need to continue attacking. Rook to h6, attacking our queen. But then we have the brilliant move of knight to f4. And this is kind of the beauty of all the different moves, and they just don't have any way to defend properly. They can't take with their pawn. You can probably see this is just checkmate right away. So that's kind of a hidden checkmate trap that we have here. They can't do that. So that's one option they have to worry about. The other option is, let's say they take with their rook on g6. Well, now we can first take with our knight. We don't have to take their queen first. We can first take their rook, check. After the king comes to e8, now we can take their queen. After bishop takes on f2, the exchange, we can take their knight on g8. And you can see we're up in material in this spot. We captured that additional rook. This should be a pretty easy game for us. Now, the only other option that they have after we played knight to f4, they could try pawn d5, opening up for their light square bishop to get involved into the game. Yes, it does sacrifice a pawn in material, but really they're in a tough spot, and sometimes you have to give up material to make sure that you don't have a position that completely collapses. So after we take on d5 with our bishop, they could bring their bishop down to g4. It's still not going to work, though. White's going to have a much better game plan than black. Queen takes on g4, pawn takes, and now knight e6 checks. You can see all the threats that we have here. King to e7. Now our knight takes on f2, capturing their queen. They take our knight on f2, and then we take the pawn on g7, and you can see we are up in material here as well. Now, while we're only up a pawn in material in this spot, they had to play perfectly just to be down in material with their king completely exposed. So definitely a fun trap if you get the opportunity to play it in the Vienna game. But thank you guys so much for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed it. Let me know if you have thoughts on this video or anything else you would like to see, and I'll see you guys next time.